Brad, the anticipation of this team this year, the excitement is almost uncontrollable here in T-Town.
Yeah, I believe it. It's a different kind of feel to it going into the year. I think, one, because of the quarterback situation, and two, because of all the new faces on defense. I know there have been other years where Alabama had to replace a lot of really talented guys on defense, but it seemed like those seasons, most of the new starters were guys who had seen significant playing time the year before. They just hadn't started. I think there are more question marks on defense this year, and combine that with the more excitement about the possibilities on offense as far as how good that side of the ball could be. And it could be a different-looking Alabama team as far as where the strength lies. And I think that's it's an unknown, and it's kind of fun to consider. Now, of course, if Alabama ends up being better on offense and pretty close to as good on defense as we're used to them being, then it could end up being maybe, have a chance to be the most dominant team that we've seen, and that's saying something considering this run.
Well, even Nick Saban told your colleague Chris Lowe at ESPN last Wednesday that he expects that this offense is going to have to score more points, that this offense is going to have some pressure to really allow this other side of the football to grow up. There's so much inexperience on that side of the football. Yeah, there's some names out there, but still a lot of inexperience when you're trying to replace 8 starters and 3 new assistant coaches and a coordinator on that side of the football.
Yeah, you're right. The assistant coaches is another part of this that, at least nationally, we haven't talked about very much, which is there are a whole lot of new guys trying to get used to players that they haven't coached before, and that certainly plays into the uncertainty. I don't know. I think it kind of sets up where you take what Saban said, and I'm sure you spent a lot of time on your show dissecting comments like that, trying to read between the lines. And when you look at it from that standpoint, they're like, hey, there might be a few games where the defense isn't as stout as we're used to it being, and the offense may need to do its part to win in a shootout. You're kind of wondering, is that giving a hint as to which way things might go in the quarterback battle? Because there's no question. I mean, you can say whatever you want about the strengths of each guy, and we all know what Jalen does best. And one of the things that Jalen has done incredibly well is protect the football. And the reason that's been such a big deal is because the defense has been great the last 2 years. And as long as you just put the other team with a long field against that defense, you're not going to give up many points. And so that was always the priority. It's just, first and foremost, don't do anything stupid. Don't, give the other team good field position. Make them earn it against that defense. And that formula won a lot of games. And so that's the question now. Is there going to be a new formula in place for this year? And look, I think the other part of this, and I'm not really sure this is just restricted to Alabama. I think there's some truth to this with teams like Clemson and Georgia as well. Although I think with Clemson and Georgia, you would say that maybe there's a little bit more urgency to figure it out because both of them have kind of a potentially tricky week 2 game on the road. But I think with all 3 of those teams, we know they're good enough to get to the playoff with last year's starter because all of them did it a year ago. So, I mean, we know that Jalen Hurts and Kelly Bryant, Jake Fromm can get them to the playoff. The question is, which quarterback, is it the last year's starter or the younger guy who's come in, which guy is better equipped to help you win the national championship? Because where all 3 of those programs are, that's the goal. That's what they want. It's not just to get to the playoff. It's who's going to give you the best chance to win it against the great defenses once you get there. And I think that's what all 3 of these teams need to figure out in the first half of the season, which QB gives them the best chance to win the whole thing.
Let me ask you, when you look at Louisville for a couple of minutes and you begin to break it down, do you see any parts that can be dangerous to this Alabama team when you look at the Cardinals?
I do think that, and of course, their quarterback is a question. We don't know exactly what we're going to get there. I mean, we know he's not a Lamar Jackson caliber runner, but if he's a pretty efficient passer, then certainly against a very inexperienced Alabama secondary, which by all accounts gave up a lot of big plays in the most recent scrimmage that they had. there is some concern there, and of course the Louisville receivers were running their mouths about what they think they'll do to the Alabama secondary, and I have to believe that helps Alabama. The fact they came out and said that so publicly can't help Louisville, but if it's true to some extent that Louisville has the better end of that matchup, they still have to be able to block Alabama's front, and that's where I really have a question as to how much will Louisville be able to accomplish offensively in this game. How much time will the quarterback have to throw the ball? Because when you put any quarterback under pressure, he's going to make mistakes. He's going to make inaccurate throws. And when you put an inexperienced quarterback under pressure, it's going to be exaggerated even more in terms of the number of mistakes and bad decisions. And so I think that's where it's kind of scary for Louisville. What may be scarier is the other side of the ball, which is that they were not a good defensive team last year. And Alabama, I think, is potentially a very explosive offense. And I have a hard time seeing Louisville's defense force a lot of punts, I guess is probably the best way to say it. Now, will Alabama help Louisville by having some self-inflicted wounds, like fumbling a snap or having a pass go through a receiver's hands, get picked off, things like that? If Alabama has some unforced errors that causes them to give up possession, then maybe you could end up in a tight game in the second half.
We are already, and I know Nick Saban would not approve of this, but there's already been some predictions when we talk about not Arkansas State, but that third game with Ole Miss. And Alabama, the question has been, can they afford to get in a shootout early with a team like Ole Miss? I don't know if Louisville is going to be enough to, but I think we'll walk out of Orlando going, you got to fix this part of the secondary. You got to make sure that these guys are on the same page. Maybe it's good that you play a team like Bobby Petrino that's going to go after the secondary to maybe get you ready to go on the road in the SEC and take on a very explosive Rebel team. Maybe not good on defense, but offense pretty solid with all their wide receivers.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there are probably a lot of similarities between those teams in terms of the challenges they'll present on offense. I don't expect either Louisville or Ole Miss to be a great defensive team. And so, there's a certain part of this Louisville game that will be a good. I don't want to call it a practice. I mean, look, Louisville's got enough players; they could beat Alabama if they don't play well. And so I don't want to write it off as one of those no chance losing games, especially with all the new faces Alabama has. But certainly, if Alabama is able to, come out of this Louisville game with a win, there definitely would be some things that they're either going to feel really good about or feel really nervous about going into Ole Miss because Ole Miss does a lot of the same things well.
Let me ask you, when 25.5 points, according to the experts, and I'm not going to ask you to pick it against the spread, but do you see this game as close? Do you see Alabama stretching it out there a little bit, or is that really the unknown part? Maybe not what we expect on the offensive side of the football. Maybe the defense gives up a couple of touchdowns and they keep it a little closer than comfort for the Alabama fans.
Yeah, look, I think, just kind of in a vacuum, my guess would be that Alabama should score in the 40s in this game. But I think one of the other factors that we don't really have a good handle of right now is the quarterback situation. And is the quarterback race decided to the point that everyone on the roster knows it's decided, or is there still legitimately a competition going on? Because if there is a competition, regardless of who actually starts, who takes the first snap, if their performance in that first game is going to decide, who ends up starting from that point forward, you could end up with a couple of guys who are trying to press a little bit and maybe, do a little bit more than they should because they're trying to show something extra to win that job. And if you end up with a couple of quarterbacks who are trying to do too much and not relying on their teammates, then that's the type of scenario that could make this game a lot closer. And so I don't look at this and say, there's no way that this game could be close in the fourth quarter. I wouldn't put the chances on that as being good, but I think that there's just a lot of variables, in this particular situation that you don't normally get with Alabama in a season opener that I think could lend themselves to the game being closer, a little bit closer late. I would still expect Alabama to win the game by double digits, But even if Alabama gets up, say, 35 in the third quarter, just the nature of a Bobby Petrino offense, and especially in a season opener where they're trying to learn a lot about themselves and build toward their remaining game, toward the conference schedule and all that, Louisville's going to keep throwing the ball. I mean, they're going to have guys in there, probably leave their starting quarterback and receivers in, and they're going to be, trying to work on stuff and get better at what they do, even if they know they're going to lose. And so I can certainly see the possibility that Louisville could, at the very least, score a couple of late touchdowns that might be meaningless to the final score, but could make it look a lot closer than it actually was. I can see all sorts of possibilities in this game.
Jake Browning, 2016 campaign was great. 43 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. He had 711 yards more in 2016 than he had in 2017. His number dropped off. He was 19 touchdowns last year, dropping down for 43. How much do you think Washington State and Chris Peterson can maybe get him back to that comfort zone? 2016, yeah, it had something to do with wide receivers, but we're talking about this Auburn-Washington game, 2:30 in Atlanta. What do you see?
Yeah, I see a lower scoring game here. You mentioned the receiver situation at Washington. Not only had they lost 2 really good receivers from 2016 that played against Alabama in that semifinal, and that was a major contributing factor to Browning's numbers being down last year. But he's now lost by far his most dangerous receiver from last season, Dante Pettis, who was arguably the best punt return man in the country on top of being the number 1 receiver on that team. And I question whether Washington has the difference makers at receiver to really be a big threat to Auburn in the passing game. Now, certainly, any team with a good quarterback is going to have the ability to move the chains throwing the ball, but how much ability do they have to make big plays in the passing game? Because I think that's important against a defense, especially one that's good enough that you're going to have a hard time stringing together 10, 12-play drives against them. And I don't know if Washington has that. At the same time, I look at Auburn and I see a bunch of new starters on the offensive line. I look at running back where they lost their top 2 guys from last year, and I just wonder, is Auburn going to be what we're used to them being on offense? And when you put those 2 together, I think you've got 2 teams that are both better on defense than they are on offense, and I think that's normal for a lot of teams in the first game of the season anyway, for the defense to be a little bit ahead of the offensive side. But in this particular case, I think that for both, that's probably their stronger side of the ball for the entirety of the season. And that might be surprising to people who don't pay a lot of attention because both of them are returning a high-profile quarterback from last year, yet I don't think either team's offense is going to be as explosive as it was a year ago.
Yeah, but can you be the workhorse running back that Auburn expects from their back at 193 pounds? I mean, that's what they list him at, Cam Martin, 193 pounds. Can you be what Auburn needs you to be at 193 pounds?
I would doubt it, but I also wonder, does Auburn need that? I mean, do they need someone to carry the ball 20, 25 times a game? Or if forced to do it more by committee, would it make a difference to their offense? I'm not sure that it would. Obviously, someone who's more in touch with them would be able to answer that question better. But on the surface, I don't see where it really makes a difference if you've got one workhorse or whether you've got a pretty good committee. I think the bigger thing with the running game is, I guess there's 2 things. One is the offensive line. Obviously, they've got to be able to do their job in order to make that running game work. The other thing is the combination of the short passing game, the jet sweeps, all of those things that Auburn likes to do, just kind of play tricks on the what we always call the eye candy, that messes with the defense and kind of gets them out of position. That obviously helps their running game a lot too. And I would expect that with Jarrett Stidham back, you can count on the quarterback to do his part as far as the deception of all of it. I think the offensive line is really the bigger factor in terms of their running game and what we'll see out of it. Hey,
Brad, what's that other game in college football that you think might have some playoff? You wouldn't say implications, but maybe would give them some momentum. I mean, maybe you could look at Miami, LSU. Is there any chance there? Maybe it's Notre Dame, Michigan. Anything else grab you from a national perspective?
Yeah, I think it's Michigan at Notre Dame. That's actually where I'm going to be on Saturday for our College Game Day on Radio show. And I think when you look at the opening weekend, I think the two teams that have the most to gain in terms of chance to make the playoff are Washington and Notre Dame. And I'm not saying that Auburn and Michigan don't also have a decent amount to gain, but Auburn and Michigan have such difficult conference schedules ahead of them that, you know, a win in this game would be big, but they still have so much left that they've got to deal with in front of them. Whereas I'm not sure Washington has anyone left on its schedule that would be as good, especially when you consider location of the game. Playing Auburn in Atlanta should be tougher than any game Washington has the rest of the way. And so I think you can make a good case that this is their toughest hurdle, their biggest hurdle. And so I think that's why it's a huge game for Washington. And then for Notre Dame, you know, you look at a schedule where there are no preseason top 10 teams on that schedule. They're like, I think, 5 top 25 teams, but they're all in that 11 to 25 range. And I think 3 of the 4 best teams they play come in the South Bend. And so, you know, getting one of these out of the way with a win, especially if they look good in the process, is going to be a big deal for Notre Dame. And you know, I think it'll be fun. I mean, because we're not only going to learn, you know, is Notre Dame a big contender, but if Michigan were to win the game, we're going to learn something about, you know, what Shea Patterson does for that offense that really struggled last year. And I think the Michigan defense is going to be good enough that if they can just get above average quarterback play, they'll be a threat to beat anybody. And I think Shea Patterson should be able to give them at least above average quarterback play. So I think they're a fascinating team. If they win that game, people are going to start paying a lot more attention to Michigan.